Talking to NSA whistleblower Thomas Drake. We were just talking about how as he began working at the NSA, his first day was September 11th, 2001, he noticed that things had immediately changed. The rules of the game had changed. Mr. Drake, talk to us about how things had changed with the FISA court, for example.
Well, that was just one of a number of secret orders they were issued from the White House as well as the other command authorities underneath the White House and the executive branch of the government. I don't think people yet fully appreciate precisely what 9/11 triggered. I said that, for all intents and purposes, 9/11 was the trigger in which the government in secret suspended the Constitution, and we've been operating under emergency powers ever since. Every time I say that, people just stare at me. Most people still stare at me in disbelief. They just can't imagine that happened. But that's effectively what did happen. Yes. And that's precisely what I confronted. One of the things they just tossed overboard and threw aside was the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the secret court that was actually created in 1978 because under the Carter administration, because of severe abuses of executive power against Americans in violation of the Constitution in the previous decades.
And of course, you and I are about the same age. We grew up watching the situation with Richard Nixon. We grew up watching the Church Committee hearings, the Pike Committee hearings, brought to the public's attention for the first time even the existence of the NSA. They've been secretly created by an executive order by President Truman. And when Pike asked the NSA director to show the charter that was created by executive order, he refused. Pike was absolutely amazed. He said, "We're giving you billions of dollars of funding here, and you won't even show us the charter that presumes to authorize you?" I mean, that's the way the NSA began, isn't it?
There was no such agency, never say anything. I mean, for all of its prowess, and there's a lot of history that has still yet to be written. You know, it was an intelligence agency. It was a military intelligence agency. It wasn't formed by Congress. There was no legislation. There was no bill signed into law by the president. It was literally the stroke of a secret pen. In 1952, and people just don't fully appreciate what that means and how easy is it to abuse that power. And that came to a head in the 70s. That's why, for me, I grew up as a very young teenager during the 70s, and I remember all of those abuses of power unfolding. People forget that the articles of impeachment that were actually formulated, in the House of Representatives, against President Nixon included using instruments of national power against the American public in violation of the Constitution. And, we ultimately had a president resigning his office. Of course, Nixon, later said, as you may recall, during the interviews, the Frost interviews, that if the president says it's not legal, then it's okay. It's legal. I mean, if he says it's okay, it's legal.
Yeah, and along those lines, I want to play this clip for you and get your reactions. Again, we've had Michael Hayden bragging about what he did in the aftermath of this. This is a clip from Washington and Lee University, and of course, we've had a lot of discussions about Section 215 of the Patriot Act. They claim that authorized them to retain all this information from Americans to do dragnet surveillance. The question being, of course, the Patriot Act, does it itself obviously violates our rights under the Constitution. But this is what Michael Hayden had to say about Section 215.
Oh, your talk today about 215? 215 is such a safe haven. 215 is legislated by Congress. I was doing metadata collection under the President's raw Article 2 authorities from October 7th, 2001 forward.
That's just so amazing to me. Every time I look at that clip, the arrogance of Michael Hayden saying, 215, that was a safe haven, that was done by the Congress, of course, in violation of the Constitution. Then he says, I had orders from the President. He points to his chest. What do we call a system of government where one person makes all the orders, Mr. Drake?
Yeah, it comes under different names, but tyranny, totalitarianism. When you combine it, what people don't fully appreciate yet is extraordinary partnerships that NSA engaged in, had even before 9/11, with a number of telcos and other information technology companies, but particularly the telephone companies. They've had those partnerships for a long, long time. Those are greatly expanded after 9/11. That's a fascist system. This is what happened. I mean, he's actually chortling about the powers that he had
Yes.
before things had to be put back into the box once they started being exposed in the press.
Yes, I guess that's one of the things.
Raw executive authority is not the form of government I took an oath to support and defend. In fact, that's an alien form of government that is a direct threat to our republic.
Absolutely. And you can see how much he loves that power in that clip and the other times where he's bragged about this. So you see this is happening, and immediately you start talking to people internally, going through proper channels. This takes a very long time, and in 2004, the DOD Inspector General produces their final report. Tell us about that.
Well, the final report, that had to do with the thin thread and trailblazer requirements. And, it was a secret report. There never was a public version made until shortly after the conclusion of my criminal case, many, many years later. But that report made it clear that Trailblazer was an utter failure, and many billions and billions have been spent. But that was just one of the channels that I where I blew the whistle. I also was a material witness and whistleblower for 2 9/11 congressional investigations. But all of my material evidence, all of the depositions, the oral testimony, all of it was censored and suppressed. In fact, as I found out later, the only record that exists that anybody can find to date, now we're talking over 13 years later, is that I was interviewed. All the actual evidence apparently is buried. What does that tell you? It was so secret that it couldn't even be in the secret report of the joint inquiry.
So they swept all that under the rug. They kept it secret.
Look, the Constitution has been suspended. I mean, this is what I confronted the general counsel on at NSA. I said, you're asking me to accept then in the name of national security that we can just simply set aside the Constitution. I said there is a constitutional means in this country. If the laws aren't working or the laws are insufficient, we go to Congress. And he said, if we do that, they'll say no. And what you don't understand, Mr. Drake, we live in exigent conditions. This is emergency conditions. It was the ends, justified the means. And so we just need the data. And it was just extraordinary. It didn't matter where they got it from. It was just, and they had the authority of the president.
Yeah. Yeah.
Literally.
So we live in an emergency.
They're gonna follow orders. So obviously someone like me getting in the way, standing up, it's going to be a marked person. And, I was targeted very early on as a troublemaker. I was targeted very early on as a threat to the orders that are being handed down. And of course, they kept this very secret. The vast majority of NSA did not know that there was this whole other program in which they had literally turned the United States of America into the equivalent of a foreign nation for vast dragnet electronic surveillance on an extraordinary scale, a scale that has still not been fully revealed to this day, in spite of even the Snowden disclosures, in spite of the disclosures that I made, in spite of the disclosures that others made, although more information has been coming out.
And of course, that's one of the things that scares us so much is the idea that they're at war with the entire world, including American territory, when we look at the indefinite detention without trial by the U.S. military. As you pointed out, of course, the NSA began and continues as a military intelligence organization. Those are the things that keep us awake at night if we actually look into this abyss.
I want to talk about a perfect storm today. And the perfect storm I'm going to discuss is a really good perfect storm. I have prayed, literally, to be able to find a high-quality gun sponsor that is affordable and that is extremely well-made and effective that I can promote to my audience. About 6 months ago, we get contacted by Head Down Firearms, hdfirearms.com. Low cost compared to competitors. Super high quality, super lightweight, super accurate, and the experts salivate over it and love it. Their entire line of 5.56, 308, and their accessories are simply amazing, and it's designed by battle-hardened vets that know what they wish they would have had. You need to go to hdfirearms.com today, or you can visit headdownproducts.com. That's headdownproducts.com.